Erwin Rommel School of Law's Level 1 Introduction to Litigation Seminar at Dallas, Texas, June 28th, 2003. Erwin Rommel started in Dallas, Texas in 1995, and we're blessed to be back. As the old-timers in the Erwin Rommel tape audience know, we may be certifiably crazy, but we're not stupid. We start all of our seminars off the same way, and that is with Psalm 91 from this Bible, a curious and obscure Catholic Bible, oddly enough, the Jerusalem Bible. Psalm 91. If you live in the shelter of Elyon and make your home in the shadow of Shaddai, you can say to Yahweh, my refuge, my fortress, my God in whom I trust. He rescues you from the snares of fowlers hoping to destroy you. He covers you with his feathers, and you find shelter underneath his wings. You need not fear the terrors of night, the arrow that flies through the daytime, the plague that stalks in the dark, the scourge that wreaks havoc in broad daylight. Though 1,000 fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, you yourself will remain unscathed with his faithfulness for shield and buckler. You have only to look around you to see how the wicked are repaid. You who can say, Yahweh my refuge, and make Elyon your fortress. No disaster can overtake you, no plague come near your tent. He will put you in his angels' charge to guard you wherever you go. They'll support you on their hands in case you hurt your foot against a stone. You will tread on lion and adder, trample on savage lions and dragons. I rescue all who cling to me. I protect whoever knows my name. I answer everyone who invokes me. I am with them when they are in trouble. I bring them safety and honor. I give them life long and full and show them how I can say. You have heard the expression, been there, done that. Our first speaker this morning is someone who has been there and done that from the great state of New York, Mr. Ron Hansel. Ron?
Good morning, everyone. What I'm about to tell you is a horror story because you're not going to believe it. Michael can verify it, and I have all the newspaper clippings to prove it to you if anybody would like to look at them. I met Michael, well, it was a fortunate thing. He was dating my sister-in-law, only he got smart. He dumped her before he married her. I married mine. It took me 15 years to get rid of her. Michael, come to think of it. I think the last deal in Florida that cost us about $360,000 did it. Michael had Alachua County right in the palm of his hand. All we had to do was to file one more paper, and my wife decided, no, the lawyer that we had representing us, so-called lawyer, she said, he's a religious man, he's going to lose his license. I said, I don't care, I want my $25,000 back. That's what we paid him. Well, they sold our property on the courthouse steps, which they had no business doing. She did collect that money of $44,000. But then we could have sued the county and got all of our money back for another $80,000, but she didn't want to do that. She said, this is far enough. Well, anyway, I met Michael, like I said, about 12 years ago, I guess, 11 years ago. And it was the nicest thing my sister-in-law has ever done, is introduced me to Michael. And we've had some conflicts with the law, but as Peter told you, I live in New York. I really don't anymore. U.S. Route 20, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I live near Cooperstown, about 15 miles from Cooperstown. U.S. Route 20 is still the only main highway that goes from one ocean to the other. The interstates, none of the interstates do it. They always quit somewhere. Well, anyway, I have 22 acres there. I've owned it since 1962. And I was in the fuel oil business. And then when the environmentalists got involved and they started closing all the gas stations, taking out gas tanks, I was involved with that. And people wanted to know where they could get rid of these tanks. Well, there's no zoning, I wasn't doing anything wrong. And that was before the DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation of New York, got involved too heavily. They started, but they didn't really know what they were doing. And they still don't today. But I had on my property probably 400 old gasoline tanks. And I was cutting them up, selling them for culverts, giving away septic tank covers, and I was making a few bucks, not hurting anybody. Well, one day, the DEC comes in. And this was back in the 70s. And I think they've been on the property, to my knowledge, somewhere around 27 times. The last time they came in was, I can't remember, because these dates, I get involved with them so far. October 91, May of 92. There was 25 of them. They stormed my house. I had a bookkeeper. She literally left the house because she didn't know what was going on. Thank God she took $10,000 with her that was in the cash box. I don't know what would have happened to that, but she came back the next day. They took records. They took records that had nothing to do with anything. When they want you bad. Well, I was indicted. I mean, I've got headlines here that, some of them aren't too good. Here's firm's leader and indicted. Here's one firm pleads not guilty. The funny part of it is they wanted me, and the company was in my wife's name. It was her business, everything. Well, we got a hold of Michael, and Michael started the procedures, and we were told to get an attorney. So we went to this attorney, that attorney, this attorney. It's going to cost us $25,000. We're looking at a $50,000 fine. She looks at me, I look at her, we don't have that kind of money. I said, to hell with it, I'll go to jail for 2 years. I says, I can't make $25,000 any easier. Until Michael got involved, so I says, well, we can't do any more than go pro se. God, that was amazing to have the DA from the county talking directly with you instead of going through some lawyer that's making some deal behind your back. How many of you people have had dealings with lawyers here? Okay, the first thing they tell you after you've explained your case is, sounds like you got a real good case. Give me $500 for a retainer, or $1,500. And that sits for a couple of weeks and you think, boy, he's working on it. Then you go back a couple of weeks later and they said, well, you didn't tell me that you drove by our house the other day or that you went and did this or that. Well, yeah, but that was nothing. Well, it doesn't make you look good. You know, you don't have such a good a case here as you thought you had. Well, what he's trying to tell you is he's already spent your $1,500 or $500, and he needs more, but you don't have a good chance of negotiating it anymore. So 6 months later down the road, everything's kind of gone away and you've paid him $5,000, whatever. Nothing's happened. He won, you lost. The other guy got, whoever it was, the same thing. I'm going to tell you a perfect incident. My problems all started from my next door neighbor. Like I told you, I had 22 acres, horse barn, 2-family house, right on US Route 20. My next door neighbor had just an acre, but his niece, by marriage, worked for the Federal Environmental FEA or whatever it is. One day when his niece was at their house, she says, I'll get that mess cleaned up. She never got it cleaned up. I took him to court through Michael. It cost him over $10,000. You know, I have the nicest neighbor now. He doesn't speak to me anymore. He doesn't wave. He doesn't even look at me. But, you know, I can do what I want on my property. Not that I do anything because I'm never there. But you're safe again. But I didn't pay anybody other than Michael. And Michael's fees are cheap, believe me. Anyway, to bring you up to date, because I could beat him in court so many times without an attorney, the judge appointed attorneys to me because I didn't know procedure. All my cases were dismissed. Just totally dismissed. I've got them right here. Anybody that'd like to look at them, you're welcome. So this really ticked off the state of New York. Now, it's okay to tick off a neighbor or maybe a family, but you don't tick off the state of New York, and I can prove it to you. I was called one day to remove some tanks from the Onondaga Indian Reservation in Syracuse. So I'm talking with the DEC guy. The DEC tells me they're representing the Federal Environmental Protection Agency because the DEC doesn't have any jurisdiction over Indian territory. So I go in, make arrangements. I call the underground facilities. That's where buried wires, gas lines, things like that. Did everything right to par. I'm in there on a Friday, and I have a DEC man that never leaves the site. If he went to the bathroom or went to get lunch, there was another one there to stay right there watching him. We just went ahead and worked our normal way. I went over and asked him if there was anything he wanted to do. No, he says, just go ahead. He says, we have no jurisdiction here. I said, okay. So I started taking the tanks out. We got the tanks out, supposed to take soil samples. All the time there's this guy by the name of, he's running back and forth, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But some of my friends that knew me are telling me that Interstate 81 comes out of Syracuse, and of course it climbs to an elevation. I'm on this level, 81 is here, and up here is US 11. There were 7 DEC guys standing up here at different locations, spying on us, watching these tanks. Now, we weren't 1,500 feet away. My cousin who was helping me stood on the tracks and he could look up and see them. And I thought they were looking for birds or something else. I didn't know that they were going to spend that kind of money to watch me. Long story short, we got everything done. Environmental cops chase trucker and find illegal dumping. I don't want to take the time to read this to you, but I'm going to highlight it for you, tell you what it is. The trucker was caught trying, oh, by the way, I have an 18-wheeler. In fact, half of it sits out in the yard right now. A trucker was caught trying to illegally dump 2 huge gasoline tanks from the Onondaga Nation. The cleanup continued Saturday. To catch trucker Ron Hansel, officers roadblocks, helicopter, maps of little-known country roads, and some pressure from the chief. It's a pretty unbelievable story, said Dick Brazell, the same guy. Okay? What this does, it tells you, and I believe in Heavenly Father, because it had been raining off and on all day. We get the tanks out, I get them loaded onto my low bed. It's about noontime. My plan was to take them to Richfield Springs, which is about 60 miles away, unload it, hightail it right back, get the other one loaded on and get out of there. Well, they jerked us around, so I couldn't do that. So I had to drop the tank off the property. That was the agreement. I would not leave the tanks on the property. So, according to Brazell, he claims that he got a tip. It says in here that the investigation began after the DEC received a tip that Ken Papineau, owner of the gas station. Now, Ken would never call the DEC. The DEC had no jurisdiction. But anyway, this is all Brazell's dealings. He says the cylinder tanks are about 20 feet long and 10 feet in diameter. He says they look like giant Tootsie Rolls. Well, if you can imagine a tractor trailer, and they weren't 20 feet long, they were 30. But anyway, a Tootsie Roll. When I left, there's 7 guys up there, plus the guy on the property. And it says here that I outran them somewhere. Now, if you know anything about tractor trailers, I did. I mean, it's what it says. Oh, here it is. But Hansel outwitted them. He got away. That's all there was to it. We couldn't find him for a couple of hours. Now, if I was as good as O.J. Simpson, I guess. Anyway, he also puts in here that the cost of the state for investigators, roadblocks, the helicopter, and police will amount to about $10,000. Well, Michael was having when I went to court, I was issued 2 tickets that night. They impounded my truck, and so I go to court, and I just go pro se, and they postpone it. I never missed a court date, never asked for postponement or adjournment or anything. Finally, the DA from Syracuse calls me. I started out, there's about 55 DAs, assistant DAs in Onondaga County. I started out with like 48, 50, somewhere down there, which is nothing more than a floor sweeper. But hasn't even got his bar exam yet, but I ended up with a top 5. One of the guys, and he calls me on the phone one day and he says, Mr. Hansel. He told me who he was. I said, yeah, I know who you are. I said, I was in court with you the other day. Yeah. He says, what the hell's going on? Why do these guys want you? Michael told me to be myself, and then he said, no, you hadn't better, so I was going to describe it to you, but I can't. Anyway, he said, I said, they want me. I said, I beat them on some DEC charges. I got the assistant DA of Otsego County fired. I said, I've got 2 JPs that don't know what to do with my so-called legal experience. And I said, I've got some bitch in Albany that works for the office. Her name is Joe Katz. I said, we've got her to resign because she screwed up on this deal. I said, but you go ahead and do what you want. I said, I'll be at court anytime you want me to be there. Well, he says, I couldn't understand why they want you so bad because they call me every 2 or 3 days wanting to know what's happening to the case. Would you believe that this paper here was dated August 25th, 1996. We still haven't put the case to rest. And I'm going to tell you why. If you get involved, first thing you do is buy stock at Kinko's or Staples or somebody, because you're going to be using a lot of their materials. You got to keep a record, and I mean you keep a phone record, keep everything. I didn't do this in the beginning, but every time I do now. Here's what's happened. They issued me the 2 tickets. They were both dismissed. One of them, the trooper perjured himself because he saw me in this township. He saw me with an empty tractor trailer. He didn't see me with the tank, and I never went through that way. So that charge was dismissed. And then that night, they recharged me with another one. After that was dismissed about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, at 11 o'clock at night, another DEC officer, they drove him 45 miles one way to my house to issue me another ticket. And they could have sent it in the mail. But they like to do what they want to do. If they want you, they want you. Anyway, I took the ticket, went to the judge. They never showed up. I told the judge, I said, he says, you wanted me to dismiss it? I says, no. I said, I have the right to because they're not here. But I said, I'd like to put this down for trial. He said, do you want a jury trial? I said, no. I says, I trust you. Well, I guess that impressed him or something. I don't know. Anyway, we had a jury trial. It was just the judge. Trial before the judge. The DA is sitting here, and next to him is this Mr. Brazel. And we hit him with questions. And by the way, there was a videotape. They videoed my whole operation that day, which hurt him. It really did, because the judge says, you could see where Mr. Hansel was looking at these tanks. He planned on reusing them. The judge ordered the DEC to return my equipment, which was about $15,000 worth. To this day, they have defied his order. So we have got this now. I've taken it into court. Remember when I told you, I said here that it would cost about $10,000, and that naturally we're going to pursue cost recovery for that, Brazel said. They sure did. Yep, they did a nice job on sending me a bill. It was for without prejudice job. It says, Mr. Hansel, the state is determined that you're liable pursuant to a New York State Navigational Section 181 for $19,413.24 for cleanup and removal costs incurred by the New York Environmental Protection and Spill Compensation Fund in connection with above referenced petroleum product discharge. It goes on to give some more law here. The cleanup costs were $19,000, and then there's a penalty of $19,999, and they wanted that by November 8th, 1999. Now here, this was dated October 7th, 1999, and this all took place on August 25th, 1996. 3 years it took them. Some girl made a mistake by sending me this bill. So anyway, what they're looking for from me right now is $39,412.24. So if any of you people would like to contribute, don't bother, because we have taken this into federal court in Syracuse with all the evidence that Michael has put together with what I had and what the state of New York has, and what the judge has, and the last judge that I had the trial before of, he told him to return my equipment. He also made the comment that instead of having 7 guys up in the field, that it would be cheaper if they posted 2 people down on the site in 2 different cars, because Brazil said that when I left there was this thunderstorm, and it come down hard, and it knocked out all their communications. That's the only reason I got away. I mean, so I believe in Heavenly Father or angels or something. But with what Michael has done right now, the judge in Syracuse, the federal judge, he's caught between a rock and a hard place. Here he wants to rule in favor of the state of New York, and he knows with the lawsuits that I've filed in federal court that he's gonna end up jumping bench here. So he moved it up for the Court of Appeals, Foley Square, New York City. So when you appeal a case, you send them a money order for $105, which I did. I get a notice back from the appeals court in New York City. They haven't received my money. Well, I call the lady on the phone and I tell her, yeah, I sent my check in there. Registered, return receipt requested. Well, you have to wait about 90 days for that money order to clear to see if it got back. The federal court in Syracuse deposited that check the day after they received it, which was the day of my letter. They never sent the money to Foley Square. Just so coincidental. Now, I think this is coincidental. Michael doesn't agree with me, but I think it's coincidental. I sent them a photostat copy of the letter and of the money order to Syracuse. Normal mail from St. Louis, Missouri, which is where I live now, might take 4 days to get to Syracuse, plus or minus. And it might even take the 5th day, but I mailed it out on Monday morning. I think what happened is the other day I got a letter from Foley Square dated the same Friday that maybe they got the letter, that my case was dismissed. Well, Michael's having a ball now, because I'll tell you, I've had people, when you do something pro se, they try to get their buddies to cover for them. And all that does is open up a new can of worms. And it's up to you to draw the line. But anyway, like I told you, I've been up here long enough. Any of you people want to know what's going on, I can show you paperwork. But as I said, Michael and I have a lot in common. One thing that we have in common is his IQ and my weight are about the same. Michael?
Thank you, Ron. I first met Michael Brown in 1989, and we became partners in the Geneva Bible Project, which we'll discuss with you when I give you the complete tour of the book table at the end of today. I laughingly call myself a partner. Basically, I'm one of the sales staff. The neat thing about being with Erwin Rommel School of Law, the main thing is that being associated with Michael Brown allows me to be a part of something that matters. And we haven't been here in 8 years, and it's nice to be back. Dallas, bolt your socks to your shoes, the Field Marshal himself, Michael H. Brown.
Okay, you've heard it from Jesse James. You've heard it from P.T. Barnum. Now it's my turn. I hope it won't be too much of a disappointment. The one thing that Ron Hansel forgot to tell you, a little minor detail, is that one of the reasons the DEC was so upset with him is the DEC in the state of New York, up until he came along, had never lost a criminal case against anybody for environmental pollution of any sort. I mean, the DEC actually shut down businesses all over the state and almost returned it to the Bears and the Indians. Ron Hansel, not only corrupt, print your own money, beat the DEC in a criminal case, he beat them twice. They went after him twice, he beat them twice. No one else, from the time the DEC was formed in New York State in 1983 unto the present hour, has ever beat the Department of Environmental Conservation in the state of New York in a criminal case. Ron Hansel beat him twice. Okay, now, there are certain things I'm going to cover here, and in case things may sound a little disjointed, I've got a lot of new information I want to bring up, and of course there are a lot of things happening. For example, we're going to have another little fun thing today. I have some Bill of Rights handbooks over here. If you want to become an expert in the Bill of Rights, in about 90 minutes it will take you one of these handbooks. They're not for sale. These are prizes for anybody who can answer the questions, because today, pupils, we are going to have questions. Okay, now, I know I have some veterans here. All of you, and you got to understand, the reason we call this the Erwin Rommel School of Law is because we apply military tactics to courtroom proceedings. And the reason that we got the title, it was actually a joke, is I was out with a girl the night before, this was about 92, and I was so exhausted the next day, I'm thinking, you know, if I go into my long spiel about military tactics, I don't know if I'm going to get through today or not, so I just got to shorten this. I just went out and as a joke said, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Erwin Rommel School of Law, and it's stuck. But you actually can use military tactics in courtroom proceedings. And where we are going to start, first question, no prizes on this one. Everybody, hold up your weapons. There we go. Now the next set, when I tell you hold up your weapons, I want to see everybody, okay? You can use law books as weapons just as effectively as you can use firearms, and in today's modern age, actually more effectively, because as all of you Second Amendment fans, and I happen to be one, should realize that what the United States Army and the Marine Corps just did in Iraq in 30 days to people who are much better armed than we are, forget that. You're not going to win any contest that way. Now, the first thing I'm going to bring up here, and this is going to be the first prize. I actually have two prizes up here. I have a Bill of Rights handbook, and I also have a 5-point proposal done for the New York State Senate. The head of the New York State Senate Judiciary Committee, Malcolm Smith, may be introducing this here directly for judicial reform. And the first question is, now, I'm going to give you a little background first. We're all familiar with this? Okay, now, here's how this nonsense started. Biblically speaking, this type of activity is the death penalty, Leviticus 18 and 20. The 9 ambulance chasers who made this decision are unaware of the word consequences. Let me explain consequences to you. Back in 42, Columbus landed in what we today call Haiti. Back then they called it Hispaniola. And there weren't very many of them. And his men got to horsing around with the local Indian women. And they brought back a strain of syphilis to Western Europe that nobody had ever seen before, they weren't ready for, they had no way to deal with. And of course, they introduced this particular strain of syphilis into the brothels in Spain. And the people in Spain, the people who visited the brothels in Spain, and they traveled to France or England or whatever, Belgium, Germany, which back then was just basically a little collection of feudal states. By the year 1495, this particular strain of syphilis, and they don't teach you this in the liberal media, and the courts never address this, in Western Europe by 1495. Now bear in mind, we're not talking about jet airplanes here. We're talking about the fastest thing on the road was a horse that would maybe go 20, 30, 40 miles an hour tops for a very brief period of time. We're talking nothing on the planet moved faster than 10 miles an hour. By 1495 in Western Europe, the number of people who had died from this particular disease amounted to 10 million. Okay? And that's what these idiots haven't figured out. Now, the prize that we're going to offer here, and you'll have your choice, you can come up and get it during the break. There's a dissenting opinion here by Scalia, and he correctly pointed something out that I had seen coming a long time ago. And what's wrong with this case, and here's how the legal system works, and by the way, the legal system is corrupt, all right? Everybody knows that. I'm going to teach you how to deal with that corruption. The thing that I cannot teach you how to deal with is your own ignorance, and we're going to get to that. In other words, Thomas Jefferson once said, it's not what you don't know that hurts you, it's what you know that ain't so. This particular case started with Griswold versus Connecticut, 1965, in which the Supreme Court ruled that a law in Connecticut banning condoms was unconstitutional. Now, what the condoms and Constitution have in common, I could never figure out. In fact, I thought, you know, somebody really needs to do a comedy on this Griswold versus Connecticut, kind of based on Thunder Road, you know, a guy with a whole trunk full of condoms and he's outrunning the cops and all that. So the next thing that Griswold versus Connecticut gives us, because they build on their own nonsense, is Roe versus Wade. Another thing that nobody considered the consequences of, which is that since 18 years and 9 months after Roe versus Wade, we are missing 2,000 18-year-old adult males out of the draft pool every day. 1/3 of all of the men who should be eligible for military service have been sucked down a sink. The other thing that these geniuses, and you have to, I'll be quite frank, I have absolutely no respect for the Supreme Court. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I've seen second-year law students that could do better work, and a lot of you here are going to be able to do better work by the time you leave tomorrow. One of the other consequences, or rather historical example they didn't consider, was that of Hannibal, greatest general who ever lived. The Romans beat him, and here's how they beat him. The Carthaginians used to be known as Phoenicians. Before they were known as Phoenicians, they were known as Philistines. And one of the things about Baal worship, the Philistine religion, was infant sacrifice. In other words, if you killed babies, that was supposed to make Baal happy. And so these idiots did that for a period of 800 years, sometimes as many as 500 children at a time. So what wound up happening when Hannibal was beating the Romans in battle after battle, and the Romans kept levying fresh troops because they weren't doing this nonsense, eventually Hannibal ran out of men. Well, none of these ambulance chasers figured that one out. I mean, nobody elected them, nobody appointed them to rewrite the Constitution, nobody gave them the authority to say, okay, this is considered acceptable behavior. Now, the question that I have for you, and you're going to have to line up at the microphone, is this. Scalia, in his dissenting opinion, and by the way, people need to read this stuff, because if you've ever read Roe versus Wade, what you see is that Harry Blackmun, who was a Nixon appointee, based his arguments on the philosophy of the Stoics. Ancient religion did not bar abortion, according to Harry Blackmun. Of course, he was not referring to Christianity. He was referring to other ancient religions. And he slid this one in on us. In 1973, if you read that case, here's what the Supreme Court actually did. Harry Blackmun used the philosophy of the Stoics. Now, when I looked this up 11 years ago, I'm thinking, what is a Stoic? I don't have a clue. So I went to the encyclopedia and I looked it up and said, oh, Stoics. Stoics were followers of Zeus. Well, followers of Zeus were not a philosophy, they were a religion. And the religion that the Supreme Court adopted as the official religion of the United States, January 22nd, 1973, was the philosophy of the Stoics, except the Stoics were followers of Zeus. To the Romans, he was known as Jupiter Olympus. To the Hebrews, he was known as Baal. In other words, Roe versus Wade gave us Baal worship as the official religion of the United States, and you wonder why we get this kind of degeneracy building on Roe versus Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, this latest one. You want me to hold it up some more, Peter? Okay. And all this other degenerate nonsense that these people have crammed down our throats. Now, the question that I have, and this is going to be a fun one, is what did the Supreme Court just legalize, and if you'll pardon my French, besides fudge packing? Okay? What did they legalize? And the first person who can get up there at the microphone and tell me what the Supreme Court made legal by contract, because a contract can cover any subject that is not unlawful. For example, if I get a couple of guys here and say, okay, look, let's just sign an oath in blood that we're going to go rob a bank. Well, that contract isn't legal no matter what you signed it in, because you cannot agree to do something and enforce a contract that's illegal. But they just legalized this nonsense. Now, my question is, and I want you to think about this very carefully, because the answer is a very simple one. What did the Supreme Court just legalize? And the only person who apparently recognized it was Scalia. Now, the reason I'm asking this is because part of what I'm here today to do is, number one, I'm going to try to teach you how to use the weapons. And to that end, at the beginning of each set, what I would like is anybody who has a question about something I have previously covered, please get up to the microphone. Like Peter told you, other people need the answers. If you're too bashful to come up to the microphone, come up and get one of these index cards, write your question on the index card, 50 words or less, and I will try to answer it at the beginning of the next set. Okay, number one, try to teach you how to use the weapons. Okay, the weapons are pencil, paper, pen, computer, typewriter, law books, law libraries, court forms, that sort of thing. They're not that complicated. There's only one profession on the face of the planet that requires less training than law. Just one, okay? And since I'm getting all these blank looks, maybe we'll make that part of the contest too, okay? Maybe we'll make that another one. Number two, I'm trying to teach you to fight in formation. Once I can teach you to fight in formation, then you will be able to accomplish things that no single person can do. I'm talking all the way up to F. Lee Bailey, Johnny Cochran, you name them, okay? But number three, and this is the most important part of this seminar. I'm not here to teach you what the law is, okay? I'm not even allowed to teach you what the law is. This is the state of Texas. This state has the worst unauthorized practice of law statutes in the world. What I am here to teach you how to do, use the weapons, fight in formation, but more importantly, I am here to teach you how to think. And if you've been through the public school system, then you're going to have a whole new experience, okay? Now, once we do that, once you use the weapons, fight in formation, learn how to think, you are going to be able to accomplish things in this legal system that you cannot even imagine. And I'm going to give you some examples. I don't know how much time I'm going to have before the next break. I don't see anybody lined up here at the microphone. Come on, people. What did these idiots just legalize as a subject of a contract?
30 seconds, Michael, 30 seconds.
Okay, then I'll tell you what. Okay, just these gentlemen here, when the next set starts, they get to come up and put them at the microphone, okay? All right,
Done deal.
everybody.
We are Erwin Rommel School of Law.
Okay, now you're going to see some notations I've made up here on the flip chart. And the first thing is beat the DEC ghost shirts. How many of you are familiar with ghost shirts? Anybody? Okay, well, you don't count, Peter. Okay. A ghost shirt, during the Indian uprisings around 1813, there was an Indian leader named Tecumseh. And this guy was trying to unite all the Indian tribes to push the white eyes back into the Atlantics. And he pretty much had his ball of twine together, but his brother was kind of an idiot. And his brother, when Tecumseh was gone, figured, oh, this was a way to make much wampum. So what he did was he started selling ghost shirts. Now, a ghost shirt, I don't know if it came with a wampum back guarantee or not, but the function of the ghost shirt was to stop the white man's bullets. And there has never been a single recorded instance of a ghost shirt stopping a bullet. They just never worked. Of course, the guy who bought it's dead, he can't complain. And there are some of you here, you're not going to like what I have to say when we get a little further on in this, but there are some of you here who have bought into ghost shirts. And I'm going to try to disabuse you of some of those notions. And by disabusing you, I want to give you a scripture. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. That's Proverbs 14:12. And what I'm going to try to teach you here is, show me what works. In other words, I've heard all these wonderful stories about all these wonderful things that have worked for people in court. I'm going to give you an example. A number of years ago, I was down in Florida, and a guy came up to me and he said, oh, I've got this non-statutory abatement, and they always work. So I said, there's no way they can work. I said, you're going to find that in a law library. I said, that's nonsense. He said, oh, I've seen them work. I've been in court. I've seen them work. I said, oh, really? He said, yes, I have. So we go back and forth about like this for 20 minutes. And the non-statutory abatement he was referring to was some kind of procedure where somebody sues you or whatever, and you just refuse it, send it back, like don't deliver it, some kind of court process. And so we go round and round for about 20 minutes. And I said, okay. I said, I got a dumb question for you here. I said, what's that? I said, you're sitting here telling me for 20 minutes you've seen these things work, you know they work. I said, why are you badgering me about this nonsense? He says, well, they don't work for me. I said, oh, really? Okay. All right. I said, now, why do you think that is? He says, I don't know. I said, well, I'll tell you what it is. I said, you own a piece of property, right? I said, how much equity you got in it? He says, about $80,000. I said, now, these people that you saw this nonsense work for, what did they have? What did they own? He says, well, they didn't own anything. I said, okay, now let me explain things in the real world to you. I said, no bank is going to litigate a case in which they know when they win, they have won nothing. They're not going to pay lawyers to do that. All right? I said, now, the reason that it looks to you like those things worked for them is because the bank president or vice president or whoever made the decision took a look at this guy's Dun & Bradstreet, and underneath it says either 0 or 15 below or whatever, and they realize immediately that even if they get a judgment, we don't have debtors' prisons, you can't throw them in the pound so the relatives will bail them out. They don't have anything you can put a lien on. They don't have anything you can sell at a sheriff's auction, so it's not worth the effort. I mean, like Sun Tzu said, in fact, one of the greatest books ever written on the American legal system is Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And one of the things that he says, all sorts of pithy sayings, there are some mountains not to climb, some rivers not to cross, and some battles not to fight. And when you're in a civil action with somebody who has nothing, then that's one of those battles that you don't fight. Well, people who have money want to keep the money. They don't want to give it to lawyers just so they'll spin their wheels. And that's what I told this fellow. I said, here's how it's going to work for you. I said, just give away everything you own next time you go to court. The non-statutory abatement will work for you. Now, when I say show me what works, because I know I get a lot of people want to get up and give mini seminars of their own and expound about what they've seen. Okay, here's the rules on that. If you want to come up and debate me on some of this stuff, then I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of it that's just complete nonsense, all right? I want to see 3 things, all right? And this is true if anybody tells you anything. In fact, first time I ever met Peter Simpson in 1989, and normally he tells this story. He does it much better than I do, but, you know, he does Monty Python better than Monty Python does on A Search for the Holy Grail, too. In fact, just as a little aside, the first time I ever saw Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I turned to my wife and said, geez, Peter does it better than that. Anyway, 3 things I want to see. I want to know which court it was filed in. You know, give me a court. Number 2, I want to know the docket number. In other words, I want to be able to call the court clerk and say, okay, there's such and such a case, and I want to see what happened in this case. And number 3, I want to see the judge's order. And if you don't have those 3 things, what somebody is telling you is quite likely nonsense, okay? Now, next order of business here, the legal system, all our laws, it's an indexing system. And it really isn't a complicated indexing system. And I'm going to be introducing it to you as we go. In other words, I'm going to give you little bits and pieces, then I'm going to tie it all together for you. So you're going to see there really isn't anything to it. Now, you just have to know how to look stuff up. But before we get there, before we get to the indexing system, one of the things that you come across when you go through the law books, because the legal system's like the Great Salt Lake. I mean, if you've ever been out in Utah, you can look at the Great Salt Lake, and it goes on as far as the eye can see. And it's humongous. At one time, it was known as Bonneville Lake, and it went all the way from Idaho down to Arizona. I mean, this thing was huge. And there was an earthquake down at the southern end of it or something about 10,000 years ago. Most of the lake emptied out. But even today, you stand on the shores of the Great Salt Lake, and it literally goes over the horizon. It's a humongous lake. But in half of it, it's only chest deep. Well, the legal system is the same way. There are certain areas of the law that you can learn that when you get into them, it's like, geez, there's nothing to this, okay? Now, before we get into actually the nuts and bolts of it, I want to show you some of the opportunities here. What you have here in the legal system, again, the legal system is corrupt. It's almost totally corrupt. But you can overcome that. You just have to know how. What you cannot overcome is the things that you know that aren't so. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples here of what you can do with this legal system. Back in the mid-'80s, I had a good buddy of mine. I'm not going to mention his name because, who knows, maybe he's pulling the same stunt again. He had a car lot out in California, about 4 acres. And he had made the mistake of getting into business with somebody else who was a con artist. And the con artist had got him to hammer credit cards to the tune of about 40 grand. And so my buddy comes to me and he says, Mike, he says, what am I going to do? He says, as soon as these credit card companies come after me, he said, they're going to take everything I've got here, my whole 4 acres. He said, I can't pay this 40 grand. He said, I got these cars in here on consignment. I don't even own them. I said, oh, so you want out of this? He says, yeah. He says, I don't know what to do. I said, well, here's what I would just point out, and of course I told him this was really unethical. Okay, you're not supposed to do things like this. I said, what I would do is I would have a friend of yours sue you. He said, what good's that going to do? I said, well, if you don't defend, your friend is going to get a default judgment against you. Your friend is then going to have a lien on your car lot. Well, since he was the first to file, his claim comes before those of all the credit card companies. And that's exactly what he did. He not only had his friend sue him, but when he defaulted, now this is called a collusive lawsuit. It's a violation of lawyers' ethics. You think there is such a thing, right? Anyway, yeah, got some swampland in Florida we need to talk about if you believe that one. Anyway, so what happened is he's looking at this and thinking, man, this looks like it's going to work slicker than snot. So then he goes one step further. He calls his buddy who's in Ohio. Now this guy's in California. He says, you know what I want you to do next? He says, let's really just do this one up brown, if you'll forgive the pun. He said, go hire a lawyer. And his buddy says, for what? He says, I want you to get a lawyer to get the default judgment against me. And he did. It worked perfect. Now, there are a few other things you can do in the legal system. Like I said, shame on you if you do anything like that, okay? Yeah, I see a couple of smirks in the audience. I wonder if this is the right crowd I'm playing to. Anyway, a couple of other things that you can actually do with the legal system. For example, one of the things that I'm going to show you is how to print your own money. And it's called creating a corporation and selling stock in it. And I'll tell you how easy it is. And you'll see this as we go along. You'll also see the principles in my lawsuit cookbook that Peter has a few of over there, I think. Is anytime you want to do something in the legal system, you simply go buy a copy. And we're going to review this of whatever it is you want to do. Now, the first case I ever had, this was about 1975. A guy named Charlie Cox came to me in the law library there in Terre Haute Federal Prison, which is where I learned, like I tell people, I went to Penn State, as for penitentiary. Okay. And this guy comes to me, had one ear shot off by a cop in a bank robbery. And he says, Brown, he said, would you help me with my case? And I said, well, Charlie, I don't want to hurt you. He looks at me, he says, Brown, I got no money. He said, I got a 20-year sentence. I've been down 7 years. I can't make a parole. He said, you can't hurt me. I said, well, on that basis, I will take a flyer. All right. So I'm thinking, I'm looking at this case and I said, okay, I knew how to use the indexing system because a guy named Harold Smith, who was the law librarian there, took me up and down. I think it took all of about 90 minutes, and he showed me how to use the indexing system, all of which is now in Chapter 4 of the lawsuit cookbook. So I'm thinking, okay, what do I do next? I don't really know the procedure here. So I sent a girl over to the Terre Haute courthouse. There was a case called Garofalo versus Benson. And here comes your first lesson in how to read legal citations. Now, Garofalo versus Benson was the name of the case. Garofalo was the prisoner, Benson was the warden. And the citation was 505 Fed Second 1212. I forget it was a Seventh Circuit case, and I forget the exact date. I think it was around 92, I believe, not really sure. Okay. Now, what this tells you is this first number is the number of the volume. We're going to go back over this because you're not getting out of here until you learn how to do this. We'll shut the doors if we have to, and nobody escapes till you learn it. 505 Fed Second, that's the volume number. Well, you can tell that it's a 505 because it's right there on the spine of the volume in the law library. Fed Second means Federal Reporters Second Series. The first series began in they had about 300 of them, ended around 1926. Late 1926, they went to the Fed Seconds. And then about 1993, they went to the Fed Thirds when they hit 999. And this right here is merely the page number. This stands for Seventh Circuit, means Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. It's headquartered in Chicago, covers Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And this is the year the case was decided. Well, anyway, what I did, not having a whole lot of experience in how to do this sort of thing, is I just sent this girl over to the district court where Garofalo had won it at the district court level. The government appealed it, and he also won it in the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. And I said, just go over there, buy the file, all right? And she did. She brought it back to me, and the first thing I noticed was this guy couldn't spell. His grammar was terrible. His punctuation was off. But I saw how he did it. I saw what he did. I saw what the prosecutor did. I saw what he did in return. I saw the judge's ruling. In other words, I had the whole file. And I thought, aha, okay, this is all I have to do. Now, this was in front of a judge named S. Hugh Dillon. I later named a white German Shepherd after him for reasons I think you can figure out, because I won't use foul language in front of the ladies here. All right. Anyway, S. Hugh Dillon, I take the exact same thing Garofalo had done, submitted on behalf of Charlie Cox, and the same judge does a 180 and tanks us, concerned meaningful consideration for parole. And I'm thinking, what the heck? So the night my world is destroyed, I'm thinking, geez, nothing works here. So I'm out in the yard with a guy named Mayberry. Now Mayberry, he won a Supreme Court case on contempt of court over 30 years ago. He was quite a jailhouse lawyer in his day. And I'm sitting there with Mayberry, and Mayberry looks and says, Brown, he says, appeal this. You'll win it in the Seventh Circuit. I did, and I did. Okay, and I did the same thing with the appeal. I just sent somebody up to get an appeal brief, looked at it, and said, okay, here's the format, here's the argument, and I just plagiarized everything and won it. Of course, they gave the credit to some lawyer. Now, I also pulled the same stunt, because if you get the file, we're going to go over this and over and over and over. One of these cases is in your workbook, where we basically just bought a copy of a lawsuit. Another time that I pulled this stunt was I got a call from Larry Flint's brother, Jimmy Flint. This was back about 1985. And I was out in Utah at the time, and Larry Flint's former bodyguard, Roger Dean Pack, was in the pound in Memphis at the time with my former running partner, Harold James Jinks. When I was in the joint, Jinks took care of all my minor annoyances because he was like 6'8" and 280, and nobody whipped him since he was about like 15 years old. And they'd heard through Roger Dean Pack, through Jinks, that I might be able to help them because Jerry Falwell had sued them for $10 million. And I said, okay, here's the deal. I think your magazine stinks, but if you'll allow me to write articles for you about the corruption in the prison system and the legal system, then I'll take a look at this case for you. And they said, okay, fine. So I ordered a complete copy of all the paperwork in this case, Falwell versus Hustler. And it was about this big, but at the same time I thought, Falwell sued Penthouse before and he lost. I want to see what he did there too. So I ordered the complete file there also. So I'm winding up with like 612 pages of this nonsense at 50 cents a page. So I go back to the original case and I thought, we got a problem here, because the same lawyer that had defended Penthouse against Falwell and won was now working for Falwell. And I thought, you guys have got a problem, okay? So I go through all the pleadings on Falwell versus Hustler, and I find one piece of paper. Now, this is something else. Write this down, okay? Any civil action, the entire case on any civil action, I don't care if you have a mound of papers that's this high and goes across the room, is going to depend on 1, 2, or at the most 3 documents, and all the rest of it is just crap. You just have to go through it to find out what it is. Okay, now here was the document I found in this one. And this is why this is so critical, because if you get an idea that you're going to look at a stack of papers this big fighting somebody else's case, and I'm going to show you how to do that here directly. I'm going to show you how to fight someone else's case without being a lawyer and without getting into the jackpot, and it's perfectly legal, and the example's right there in your workbook. Anyway, I get down to this one particular page, and here's a letter. Now, what this whole lawsuit started over was a really obscene cartoon about Jerry Falwell and his mother in an outhouse the first time, okay? Basically, they were saying, in this cartoon, they were saying he was committing incest with his mother in an outhouse. And I told these idiots, I said, you people got no common sense. I said, even if you were on good legal ground, you knew he had to sue you, Well, I get about halfway down through this pile of paperwork, it's 300 pages. And there's this one letter. This is their whole case, all right? From a lawyer named Kahn out of New York City, their corporate legal counsel. And he had reviewed this cartoon and said, well, I don't see anything here that's defamatory. And I'm thinking, where did this guy come from? Did this guy get his bar card last week? And so Jimmy Flint came back to me and said, okay, Brown, he says, how do we get this thing derailed? I said, there's only one way that you can get it derailed, but there's another way you can mitigate damages. I said, okay. So the first is you can challenge jurisdiction because this thing was filed in Lynchburg, Virginia, but you guys are operating out of Los Angeles. So that's where it should be. Well, they lost that one in the United States Supreme Court. I said, now, the only other avenue of escape that you have, I said, you're looking at $10 million here. I said, the only thing that your attorneys can do is they can look at what this attorney did to them. I said, now, the only way that you have a chance of surviving this case is you're going to have to convince a jury, hey, look, you know, we may have screwed up, but it's not our fault, it's this lawyer's fault. Apparently they did it and it worked because the $10 million that Jerry Falwell was looking for, and by the way, Hustler has lost cases for $10 million before, shrunk to $300,000. And of course then they turned around and stiffed me because as soon as the case was over with and they'd gotten what they wanted, I said, okay, it's time for you guys to pony up. They forgot who I was. You know, maybe it's what I got for dealing with people like that. But again, 1, 2, or at the most 3 documents on any given civil action, and because that's what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with civil actions. Now, give you a couple other thoughts here. Oh, by the way, the guy who taught me that, his name was Harry Feldman. He had been a sergeant, buck sergeant in the Marine Corps on a mortar crew back in the Korean War. And what had happened was a Chinese 105 shell had landed next to him during the battle for the Chosin Reservoir. And he lay out in the snow, sunny side up, for 2 days when the temperature was like some horrendously below zero, 20, 30, 40, I don't remember what. And he got frostbite while he was unconscious. And they took him to a hospital in Japan, and they were going to amputate his hands. He said, look, just, you know, if you're going to do that, just go ahead and kill me. He said, you know. So finally, they compromised by just amputating the ends of his fingers. So when he got out of the Marine Corps, the only thing he could do with fingers that were half the normal length was type. So he went to law school. And Harry Feldman, up until the time he retired, never handled a case for less than $5 million. And when anybody would call him up, in other words, this guy was so feared by the other members of the profession, as soon as they saw Harry's name on something, they'd just call him up and say, Harry, what do you want? Because they knew they were in for a fight, because this guy knew what he was doing, and he wasn't a lawyer because he wanted to be a lawyer. It was because it was the only profession open to him where he was missing half the length of his fingers. And by the way, in most cases, people who go to law school, now there are a few exceptions, but people who go to law school, they don't become lawyers to ensure justice. Anybody want to dispute that statement? I don't see any hands, okay. They don't even do it for the money. They do it because they want to have power over other people. And there's no place that you will see this more effectively demonstrated than when you're dealing with a female prosecutor, because almost every one of them has a broomstick, and she rides it, okay? In fact, I think there's a joke about like, no, I won't tell that, it's kind of off color. Anyway, I'm going to use some examples here, all right? 80% of the people out there can't afford lawyers. 80% of the cases out there, even if a lawyer could be afforded, are not worth a lawyer's time. 40% of the lawyers out there, when they do take your case, they're totally unprepared. This is especially true in criminal cases. In fact, it's more like 99.9% in criminal cases. They're unprepared because lawyers today, the way they work, they are not trained to fight cases, they are trained to negotiate cases. Now, you might be able to do that in an insurance settlement, you might be able to do that in some civil actions. Won't work in a criminal case because a lawyer attempting to negotiate a case in a criminal case is the equivalent of stepping into the ring and you have a referee and you have another fighter there and you're looking at the other fighter and you're saying, can we negotiate this? You're not going to win. And most criminal cases are lost because the lawyers are totally unprepared. They don't do the work they're supposed to do. They don't investigate anything. They go in thinking, okay, they're going to negotiate it. In fact, I refer to most of these lawyers these days, I'll give you a new term in the English language, they're pussycats, okay? But I'm not through yet, all right? They're not only pussycats, they're Judases. In other words, a lawyer's average fee for a case is 30 pieces of silver. And so I refer to them as Judas pussycats. Describes almost the entire legal profession. You'll also see this described by a fellow you are mostly familiar with through the Bible, And you'll find it in Luke 11:46 and Luke 11:52. Now, let's go one step further. Let's say you could have a lawyer. It costs you no money. He'll never betray you, right? He's the same sex as you are. In other words, and Margaret Ryan's going to have something to tell you about a lawyer that she had as a defense lawyer, and I can tell you some other things that will turn your stomach. All right? And this same individual is capable of fighting your case better than anyone. All right? Now, I want to see a show of hands of everybody who knows who I'm talking about. Yes, sir. Bingo. Throw that man a fish. Okay? Yeah. Nobody can fight your case better than you can. And the reason is nobody knows the facts of your case better than you do. Now, let's get into the nuts and bolts here. Like, you know what? Before we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you nobody can fight your case better than you. All right? And sometimes you might be able to fight someone else's case better because maybe he just doesn't have the marbles. Deal with it. And the first example in your workbook. Let's open a workbook here, people. All right? Now what this is, let's go to how to fight someone else's case without being a lawyer. What I'm about to show you here is how to create your own lottery tickets in your own lottery. What I'm about to show you here is how to print your own money. I said I was going to show that a little earlier. Let me tell you how that's done. Let's cover the printing your own money first. They're called stock certificates. And if you know how to do it, if you know how to use the legal system, it isn't that difficult to write a prospectus, get an accountant. These are things that lawyers normally charge 6 figures for. The last time I did it, it took me 2 weeks, and I got it past the SEC in Chicago on the second go-around. All you have to do, it's like lawsuits. If you want to put a corporation together and you want to take it public and you want to raise $5 million, all you have to do to write the prospectus is get a prospectus that looks even remotely familiar to what you're doing and just connect the dots. It's the same thing you do with lawsuits. But it gets better because a lawsuit itself is actually a piece of property. In other words, I can sell you one of my lawsuits, you can sell me one of your lawsuits. It's called an assignment. Before we get there, let me back up a little bit here, okay? One of the things that, like I said, there's some really amazing things you can do with this legal system, and I'm going to try to keep myself on track here because I got all kind of notes. About, this is going back 29 years ago. I'd been in federal court, and I had been a naughty boy, and a federal judge gave me 25 years. And the day he gave it to me, or the minute he gave it to me, I could feel my heart go into my knees. I'm thinking, 25 years. So then they're in open court, and there's people all around. I say, I'm not going to see these people. They're not going to watch me show any fear or trembling. So they put me down in the bullpen, and I'm pacing back and forth in the bullpen, and I live by Romans 8:28. Everything works together for the good of those who love God. And I'm pacing back in this bullpen. I'm 32 years old. I've just been given 25 years in a federal prison, and I'm thinking, okay, God, you're going to have to go a long way to show me how this one's going to work out for me. I'm thinking, I got a kid that's 18 months old to be out of high school time I get out of prison. And anyway, within a very short period of time, I'd learned how to use the legal system. A guy named Harold Smith took me under his wing. First I was in Lewisburg, and Lewisburg wasn't a bad place. It was kind of a nice place to jail. You had some really high-quality convicts and good food, and I worked in the machine shop, and they had a really good library. I was jailing pretty easy. And then they sent me to Terre Haute, where, in fact, I was in the same block where Timothy McVeigh was when he was on, it's now Death Row, D block. And anyway, I get sent to Terre Haute, and I'm thinking, okay, at least there's a library. At least I have a way to pass my time. Now, at the time, there were 31 federal prisons. Now, by law, every federal prison had to have a law library. They didn't have to have a regular library by law. Now, of the 31 federal prisons, 30 of them had regular libraries. Guess which one didn't? Okay? I walk up there the morning after I get there, and I'm thinking, holy mackerel, there's no library in this place, and I got to be here for the next, 24 years or so. And, my world was just destroyed. And as I'm going back towards the dormitory that I'd been assigned to the night before, I see this sign. And I'm looking at this sign and it says law clerk wanted, we'll teach you how to use law books. So I figured, the place was going to be just packed with people. I was the only guy who was interested. It was 1,200 guys behind the wall. I'm the only guy that's actually interested in learning how to use the legal system. So Harold Smith took me under his wing. He started teaching me how to do things. And within less than a year, while everybody else was having a hard time in the prison, and I did this without snitching on anybody, by the way, I was working in the officer's mess. I was eating in the officer's mess. I had to work 1 hour a day. It was really traumatic for me, okay? Then I could go out and play in the yard. I could play in the weight pile. I could go up and use the law library. And I got the job because of a guy named Jim Davis who'd come to me with a legal problem, and I'd taken care of it for him through what Harold Smith had taught me. And every Thursday, Chuck Bartoli, they called him Chuck the Barber, he was Sam Giancana's partner, he would bring me this whole laundry cart full of reading material because all the fourth class mail wasn't forwarded. They just threw it away. So Chuck would just put it in this humongous laundry cart, just full up to like that, and he'd bring it down to me. Congressional records, medical journals, newspapers, all kinds of nifty stuff. And so I'd go in there and I'd do my thing for about an hour a day. I was the poundage clerk. I had to keep track of all the food coming in and out of the prison. And then once a month I had actually to do 3 hours worth of work because I had to balance the books. And it wasn't too bad. I had my own cook, my own barber. I ate in the officer's mess. I had my own clerk, a guy named Harry Borum. Harry would come in every morning and say, okay, boss, what are we doing today? And oh, by the way, what would you like for breakfast? And I'd say, okay, I'll take steak and eggs, 6 eggs over easy. I want steak and so forth and so on. And had my own bodyguard, had my own executioner, never had to use him. Basically, I was the emperor of Terre Haute. And as I've told people for years, if I could have got a woman in there just once a week, I'd have probably re-enlisted. I really had it made. The 25 years got dropped to a 10, the 10 got dropped to a 5. Actually, on a 25-year prison sentence, I did about 41 months. And I got a legal education in there I couldn't have gotten in 100 years on the street. Now, so if you have a legal problem, you can look at it in one of two ways. It is either punishment or instruction. And for me, I needed that 3.5 years in Penn State because if I hadn't had that training, right now I'd probably be sleeping in a station wagon. As it is now, I can teach you how to print money. I can teach you how to sell things. For example, and this is where we started, is that you can actually sell parts of a lawsuit. Like I said, it's property. And the legal system, it's like Aladdin's lamp. If you know how to rub it, it'll get you anything you want. Wealth beyond the dreams of avarice. It'll get women who don't even like you to submit to you. It doesn't count for your wife because she already knows better, okay? It will give you power, and I'm going to demonstrate that here very shortly. Now, bear in mind that I'm an ex-convict. I don't have a college degree. I don't have a trade. This is all I know how to do. A few other things I've taken a few college courses for. But I'm going to show you where this legal system, if you know how to use it, is going to get you anything you want. Now, there's one caution on Aladdin's lamp. Don't rub it the wrong way. It'll kill you, okay? Now, nobody came up to the microphone and told me what the Supremes legalized in, what'd they legalize?
Criminal activity.
Nope. They've done that ever since they've been in.
Bigamy, basically.
Come up here and get your book. Yeah, the Supreme Court just legalized bigamy and or polygamy because anything that is legal, now it's right here. Take either that or that, okay? Anything that is legal can be the subject of a contract. And what these idiots have just done is they have also, by implication, and trust me, there's going to be a court case on it, and whoever fights it's going to win it, they have just legalized bigamy and or polygamy, okay? Now, there are still just a few states in the union that have what they call lewd cohabitation statutes. Went down the toilet, okay, with this decision. In fact, Scalia pointed that out. Now, we're going to talk about is an assignment. Like I said, and this is the first part of your workbook. You can sell me your lawsuit. I can sell you my lawsuit. You can sell him your lawsuit if you want to. They are property. Now, once you do that, and this is what this case is about. This case here, and this guy, by the way, this Ringson Merle Perry, was a pro se litigant. And he won this case in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. And with this case, correctly holds is that because a piece or a legal action is property, you can buy and sell that property. In other words, for example, let's say this gentleman who's yawning right here, okay? Let's say he has a legal action he doesn't want to pursue, and I'm looking at it thinking, man, I could clean up on this. So I go to him and say, look, tell you what, you don't want to deal this thing? Just give me a notarized statement, okay, a bill of sale on your cause of action. I now own his legal action. I now am in his shoes as a pro se. I see some of you chuckling at this, and you know how this is going to work, okay, all right. I can now fight his case as if it were my own, because it is my own. I just bought it, okay? And that's what this case is. This guy here, kind of some kind of urinating contest with this city in Wisconsin, and since he'd already taken his shot and lost, he figured he wanted another bite out of the apple, so he went to a guy who wasn't going to sue anyway and said, here, I'll give you $100 for your cause of action. And the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, it's a pretty good case, by the way, actually sent it back down and said, yep, you bought it, you got it. Okay, now, there's a couple things I want to caution you on in this case that they don't really mention too well, is this. There's a couple of legal phrases, because remember, we are talking about suing here. This is not a criminal law seminar, this is civil. There's a couple of terms that you need to become very, very familiar with. All right, one of them is collateral estoppel, and the other is res judicata. Now, anytime you want to look something up, you just go to Black's Law Dictionary, and it'll tell you basically what it means. But what these are the civil equivalent of double jeopardy. You only get one bite out of the apple, but it's worse in a civil case than it is in a criminal case. In a criminal case, we call it double jeopardy. It's the same principle. But in a civil case, collateral estoppel means issue preclusion. In other words, you already raised the issue, you don't get to raise it again. But it gets worse, because res judicata means claim preclusion. In other words, if you sued somebody and you had 5 causes of action, and you left off 2 of them, once this case is settled, you are forever barred from raising those claims. Okay? It's a civil equivalent of double jeopardy. Now, let's see here. Okay? Now, first thing we're going to do in any civil case, and this is also critical, is what's the first thing? Can anybody tell me what is the first thing you look for in any action? And this means civil or criminal. The first thing you're going to check, what is it? Come on, I've had people here before. Yes, sir. Statute of limitations. That's absolutely correct. Okay? Statute limitations. All right? And that goes both ways. If somebody is suing you, I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, I had a guy down in Arkansas, and he came to me with a case, and this fool had signed a promissory note for $60,000 for some flim-flam artist in Virginia. So he came to me, and he said, Brown, he said, you got to help me here. And I looked at it, and I said, Charlie, they got you cold. I said, they absolutely have you by the throat. And I said, I don't know what I can do with this. He says, Brown, he says, look, I don't care. He says, just help me. He says, whatever it takes. He said, he says, if I have to part with 60 grand, he says, I'm going to lose everything I own. I said, well, okay, I'll see what I can do. So I think, well, maybe I can help mitigate the damages, because even though he signed the note, the guy in Virginia was mostly at fault. So he sends me all the paperwork, and I take it over to this typist, and I've basically done my response for him and so forth and so on. And I take it to this typist, and I get all the way home, because back then I didn't have my own in-house typist. I had to go outside, and I sit down at my desk, and I'm looking at this thing, and I have a fit. I'm thinking, this stupid bimbo, she hasn't put the docket number on it, okay? And I'm thinking, now I've got to get the whole thing typed all over again because she didn't put the docket number on it. So I look at the summons form. There's no docket number on it either. So I look at the rest of Charlie's paperwork. There's no docket number. Okay. So I called Charlie. I said, Charlie, you got to find out what the docket number on this clunker is. I said, because if we send it up there with no docket number all the way to Minnesota, the court clerk's going to take one look at it, no docket number, not know where to file it, back it comes. Charlie says, okay. So he calls up there to Minnesota to the court and asks what the docket number is. And the girl up there says, well, there isn't one. Charlie says, "Why is that?" And she said, "Because this case was never filed." What this lawyer had done, because the filing fee in Minnesota was $250, he had apparently pocketed the $250, and he did up a lawsuit, and he did up a summons form. He just didn't bother to pay the filing fee or file this clunker. Well, here's where they ran into problems, because in the state of Minnesota, there is a 6-year statute of limitations. But in Arkansas, for personal injury, for anything like this, it's only 2. And in almost every state in the union, the statute of limitations that controls is the shorter one between the 2 states. In other words, the statute of limitations for this land shark idiot in Minnesota wasn't 6 years, it was 2. And when we found this out, it was 2 weeks past the 2-year statute of limitations in Arkansas. So what this lawyer did was he took a case he couldn't lose, and he turned it into a case he couldn't win simply because he decided to pocket $250 that he should have used for the filing fee. So again, statute of limitations. The same thing is true in a criminal case. In a criminal case, you have to be a little more careful. In fact, Ron Hansel's brother, we had a case, this is going back about 8 years ago, where his attorney looked at an 8-count indictment, and as soon as I looked at the indictment, I could see that 2 of these things were past the statute of limitations when he pled guilty. Well, we raised that issue on an ineffective assistance of counsel issue. Anybody who wants to check that, it's the Federal Reporters 70 Fed 3rd, page 6, U.S. versus Hansel, and the court gave it to us on that. And I'm not going to get into the rest of what was wrong with that case. But what you're going to find is a lot of times even the attorneys, the lawyers, will not check the statute of limitations. That's the first thing you check, offense or defense, statute of limitations. Now, there's a problem here, because in the criminal courts, and this is just an aside here, if you don't raise that as a defense, you are considered to have waived it. In other words, you basically just went along and agreed with it, which is nonsense. But anyway, now there are a couple of exceptions here. Okay? You always check the statute of limitations first. Now, when we come back in off the break, what we're going to discuss is a principle called equitable, that's supposed to be an A, estoppel. And what this does, there's also another couple of things we're going to cover here too, is this is going to show you how to get around the statute of limitations. I mean, there is a way to do it, but you have to know what you're doing. You have to know the principles involved. And by the way, when you're reading cases, you don't